Okay, that happens all the time.
A day in the life. I'm
Yeah.
so great to meet you. I loved your story.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's really an honor to be invited.
Oh, great. I'm an environmentalist also, so I especially appreciate what you're doing. I think giving voice to issues using personal stories and um, short story is really powerful.
I mean, fiction works well, I think,
Yes,
that kind of thing. Mhm.
right. I wrote a bunch of questions. I'll read them to you. See what you
Oh,
think of them.
okay. So I can be prepared.
Well, they're not to you. Um,
Okay.
just so you don't have to worry about being on the hook for anything, because the whole idea of this program is to use a short story to get everybody to talk about public questions. I think you read the thing I wrote about future shock. I think,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Mhm.
I think that's really the purpose. Although you never know how people are going to react because they see an author and they say, "Oh, the author should tell us about her story, and we should ask questions." That.
I'm fine answering questions, and Sharyn told me just to like have a little 5-minute thing. So I did do that.
Oh, good, 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 good. Now
Yeah.
I can't find my questions, my brilliant questions. Where are they? There.
You will probably want those.
This was my first one. Pandemic issues impact all of us, especially following COVID. The bird flu is one of the first crises. At that time, the government just decided to kill chickens. What are the pros and cons of this sort of policy? What are the lines, criteria for decisions, etc.? Does the government have the right to take action for the greater good of more population? Or individual rights? If the government does take action, must they compensate individuals? And if so, by how much? And who decides? These issues have been handled differently through eminent domain and then COVID PPP money.
Yeah.
Kind of hits the
Actually,
nail.
I thought about that when I was rereading the story just to be prepared. And that's something I'll talk about is just I wrote the story in 2014 and
Oh,
2015. So reading it after COVID is a real different experience, and thinking about it after COVID, even for me, is a really I think it forced me to ask a lot of questions about
yeah,
about those exact same issues, seeing how they actually played out during COVID,
yeah,
and,
exactly.
um,
And when I think, I mean, I know I constantly struggle with what's for public good and what's for personal good. Um,
yeah. So
I
yeah, I did think a lot about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I personally did not take the COVID vaccine, not for any political reason, but simply because my health was too poor and I wasn't allowed to take it. So
Mhm.
I literally had to isolate for 2 years when everybody else was out and about. I was still isolated, and
Mhm.
I figured out different ways to adapt and to figure that out. But I tend not to take vaccine anyway. I'm not rigid about it, but I just don't. I mean, I don't take medications. I don't let things in my body.
Mhm.
um, so it's, to me, this is really an interesting discussion. And
Yeah.
the person from Pfizer, it just interestingly by chance, the person from Pfizer who he was a microbiologist and he distributed all of the COVID, not the COVID, the bird flu vaccines
Mhm.
for Pfizer
Yeah.
nationally, happened to live in one of my apartments in Cambridge when I was there.
No
And he
kidding.
would come to my house for dinner a lot of times because he lived in Philadelphia and so he wasn't with his family. He would just have dinner with me. And it was so interesting because he kept saying, "But you're not taking this vaccine." And I said, "No, I don't think I have anything to do with the bird flu myself." I just don't think that, and I never was impacted by it. I lived in a city, but with COVID, I probably would have, but it just was I physically couldn't, but,
Yeah,
so it's interesting to me
I
to,
think so. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Here's another question. Since the bird flu, we've had years to think about, here's your question, think about the policies such as this. What are your perspectives? Question 3, how do we know if we should trust the government? Is it true? Is the science accurate? Number 4, quote, trust the experts. How do we build trust in experts, especially as we read stories of payoffs, funding bias, etc.? Am I hitting the basis of your thinking as you wrote that story?
I mean, yes. Yeah, to a degree. I was thinking a lot, and I'll also talk about this, so you'll probably have to hear it twice, but
That's okay. I love hearing things twice.
I was thinking a lot about food sovereignty and the way that food safety was at the time sort of being used to, or how easily food safety could have been used by corporate food companies and agribusiness to eliminate competition from small farmers and home gardeners. And so that was one of the things I was really, that felt as a small farmer, because we were farming at the time, that just felt very possible and very real and sort of intentional, so that was one thing. And then the fear of water right eminent domain is very present in rural communities, at least in the Colorado Front Range. And so that piece of the story came from a real conversation we had with our neighbors at a 4th of July barbecue about, they were just so sure the state was going to come take our water rights. And it was just and this was like again, this was 2012, 2013, 2014. Yeah, there were some real things that were swirling around that became then part of the fictional story.
You'll be interested in water rights. My family owned, and now I own, a place sort of in the thumb of Michigan. I'm from Michigan originally, and it was pretty big, and it has a pond in the middle, and the pond is fed by a natural spring. So although all the water is polluted because the water around the thumb is polluted because of the toxic waste, our little spring is clean as can be. We have the best water anywhere. And so the town, because they heard about it, tried to take our water. And I said, it's just not for sale. We have just a little spring. We don't know how deep it is or anything. And no.
Yeah.
And we have no interest in setting up a bottling thing. We're not selling the water. It's just our little spring for our little property.
Sure.
Anyway, it's been very interesting because while that was happening, they were selling rights to Nestle's.
Yeah, Nestle owns a lot of water all over the
me.
world.
You're trying to go after me and my little spring on my own property, where we have lakefront or little pond front property. Yet you're not, but you're negotiating with Nestle's to give them the water. So
yeah, I'm surprised Nestle never came to you. They probably will at some point.
They don't know about me. I lay low. Oh, goody. It's Ann Bustamante.
Good morning.
Ann runs our environmental program, which is part of public and global affairs. So she's an environmentalist too. So
I'm enjoying it.
Yeah. Wonder where Sharyn is. So I'm going to just keep reading. I wrote some questions, Ann, and I wanted to just give Claire my questions, not because she's answering them, but because I want to see if I hit all of her points in her story.
Okay.
How do we as a citizenry decide together about policies, and is that even possible? And if there is a pandemic and some recombinant DNA lab with poor procedural guidelines releases a contagion, how are they held accountable? How do we hold the scientists responsible? How do we hold the institution or the corporation responsible? What are the ramifications? And are we able to stop bad actors 100%? Our heroine was going to be arrested. Just to point out the difference. That's it. There's Sharyn. It looks
Hi,
like
Diane.
oh, hi.
Hi, Claire.
Hi, Sharyn.
And I think I see Chuck.
At least you see a little name.
There
we
he
go.
is. Claire, it's Charles Johnson.
Hi, Charles.
So, well, great. At least we're all here on time. Yay us. There are about 10 people, I think, that are intending to come.
10. Okay.
Yeah, so it'll be bigger than we thought. I thought I would introduce, I guess, the program, and then Sharyn is going to introduce you, Claire. And then when I introduce the program, I'm going to point out that, we're trying to have everybody participate. So it's not just a question and answer to you, although, yes, you must answer our questions.
I don't mind.
Or at least some way of getting around this.
Yes.
Normally when I visit with book clubs, that's all I do. I just answer questions. So I'm ready. That's
I wanted to alert you
Yeah.
that this is a little different because we really do want people to talk about it, to talk and participate, and also to be talking about the issues, the underlying issues.
Right. I think we're not ready to start yet. I think that I am probably going to ask more literary questions. And Diane, you can ask the global issues.
Yes.
I see Chuck is drinking some coffee. I'm going to get some tea. I'm going to be right back.
I just read I read the global issues to Claire, so she's not caught off guard.
Oh,
The
okay.
questions I sent you.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Hi, Gary. Gary
Hi,
Luke.
Gary.
So Charles, I missed your talk because I was in New Mexico. I was so sad.
I wish you could have been there. We had a good time.
Everyone told me that they just had so much fun and that they laughed so hard. I like it when I'm laughing.
Well, David Horsey is such a charming person, and he is a superb draftsman and really one of our most important editorial cartoonists. So anytime I have an event with David, it's just a delight for me, because that's what I was, a cartoonist when I started out.
It's so great.
But I'm really glad you were able to put all this together. I think it's a very special event for the Rainier Club. It's unique. I cannot think of any other anthology that has had a series of discussions with each of the 26 authors like this. So I'm looking forward. I'm just going to be a fly on the wall. So don't worry about too many questions from me. I'm just waking up with my first cup of coffee. I hope Sharyn gets herself her cup of tea, and you could relax and have fun.
Yeah, it'll be fun. And what we're going to do, the reason when everyone joined, it said recording. What we're going to do is we're going to record this event, And then we'd like to share it on YouTube. So if you don't want to be recorded, tell me quickly and I'll try to edit people out. But the idea being that we'll record it and then people will record it on YouTube, and then people who are in the club who've missed it can watch it privately, and then we'll talk about whether or not we want to also make it publicly. I'm sort of an advocate for making it public, but I want to make sure everybody in the club has their say about what they think. We all have opinions.
Well, mine is to make it public also.
Yeah,
I think it should be.
yeah.
And I'm a member.
There
What
you
about you, Chuck? You're a member.
There's
I think making it public is a good idea.
bias.
I think it's marvelous. Yes, we're trying to broaden our reach as a club and broaden accessibility to the greater community. I was just working on a grant application that we're making and that addresses that. So yes, I'm in favor. And Claire, I have to tell you, I live next to some people who have chickens in their backyard, and they every now and again I get a half a dozen fresh eggs. So I was really excited by your story and can't wait to hear you speak a little bit about it. It was so fresh and like nothing I've read before.
Oh, thank you.
Tamarah,
Eggs ever from backyard chickens or
Tamarah.
chickens. They're great eggs.
Yes.
and Tamarah, who was here, she's the chair of the literary committee, and she raises ducks.
Also good eggs. Also good eggs.
Yeah, I'm raising ducks because they didn't have chickens at the store that day, and they had ducks. So I've raised chickens before, and they're lovely. And the ducks are a little bit more neurotic, and I identify with that a little bit more. I think chickens, they seem so practical. They have a routine every day, and the ducks don't. So they've worked out very well.
Wonderful.
Well, Ava's here, Ann's here, Meredith's here.
Hello. Hi.
Hi,
Hi, everybody.
Ava's a writer, really wonderful writer, so you'll appreciate
Oh,
it.
great.
Fellow writer. So is Tamarah. Tamarah is a poetess.
A poet.
Always love to meet fellow writers.
Exactly. Well,
Well, Chuck is also a writer. He's in the book, Charles Johnson.
Ah.
And I'm using the bookmark from from our wonderful evening with our club laureates. The bookmark that we handed out that evening on April 19th. I'm using that as something joyful to remind me each story I listen to or read, and so that's real fun.
Well,
Oh,
maybe
okay,
really
Gary.
nice bookmark.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Gary, are you able to talk? No. Okay.
okay, we'll read your comments, Gary, if you write them. Thank you. Well, I just want to, I'll start off the meeting now. I want to welcome everyone to come to our first event of What's Next, which is going to be a year-long series, interviews with authors that are included in Sharyn Skeeter's book, What's Next? And when I first read Sharyn's book, I was completely intrigued because it's an anthology of short stories on topics of civic and social issues and policies, each one more interesting than the next. So I can't even figure out which one I prefer. But this was such a moving book that Janice Weinmiller, who's now passed over, brought it to me and said, we have to do something with this book, and it should be with public and global affairs. So that's how this program came to be. And Sharyn did a phenomenal job of recruiting all the authors. And our concept here is that the author will speak for 5 minutes or so on their story, and then we'll have question and answer. But it's more than question and answer to the author. It's really a dialogue, a conversation in which all of us participate and begin to ask some of the deep questions, ask and give our opinions. Opinions are welcome, about the deeper issues that are being addressed in this short story by the author. So with that, I'll turn it to Sharyn.
Okay, today we have Claire Boyles, who's the first in the series, which I'm really glad to see her smiling face. And Claire is a writer. I'm going to read this from something that you might have seen already, but I just want to make sure you know who she is. Claire is a writer, mom, former farmer who lives and writes in Colorado, a 2022 Whiting Award winner in fiction. She's the author of Site Fidelity, and Site Fidelity is the book that Chickens comes from, which was longlisted for the Penn Robert W. Brigham Award, the Colorado Book Award, and the High Plains Book Award. Her writing has appeared in various journals. She teaches at Eastern Oregon University's low residency MFA program in creative and environmental writing. So Claire.
First, I just want to thank Sharyn for including me in the anthology, which was an honor in itself, and to all of you for inviting me to come talk to you today, which is a double honor. So thanks for having me. Chickens is one of the first short stories I ever wrote. Actually, I wrote the story in 2014 and 2015, although it developed over the next few years. It was published in 2018, first published in 2018. We had a small scale, what we called sustainable, but would now be called regenerative vegetable, flower, and meat farm in the Eastern Plains of Colorado. That we did that for about 6 years. And at the end of 2013, we pretty much had to sell before the bank foreclosed. So that was sort of where the inspiration for Chickens came from. There are two sort of real life events from our time farming that inform the story. One was that Colorado State University was monitoring our chicken flock for bird flu. Bird flu was quite a threat at that time. And although nobody was killing chickens, that wasn't happening. I was thinking a lot at the time about the ways that food safety could be used as a tool by agribusiness companies and corporations to limit competition from small farms like ours, and even from backyard chicken holders or backyard gardeners, because the regulations would be too expensive for smaller operations to comply with. So that was sort of one thing that was swirling around my mind, one idea. And the other piece of it, the water rights piece, came out of a barbecue we went to with our neighbors, all of whom were very conservative. And actually, Ken and Perry Buck were in attendance at this barbecue. Ken Buck is one of Colorado's House representatives, and his wife Perry is very active in state and local politics. And our neighbors were just a big part. Almost the entire conversation was our neighbors being convinced that the Colorado state government was going to come and eminent domain all our water rights. And it was this big, from my cold dead hands, how are we going to mobilize the militia? I mean, that was an actual barbecue that we were at. And of course, that's not in the works. That wasn't in the works at the time, but it was just, it's sort of this ever-present idea in rural Colorado that will happen at some point. So that's sort of where I then created Grace. And set the story in a near future world, which at the time, the story was originally published with the title Chickens 2019, because in 2014, that was like the year I picked to be the near future setting. Reading the story now, the book Site Fidelity came out in 2021, and there was an audiobook version that I listened to that was actually really delightful. I thought like that the voice actors did such a good job of, it was sort of like an extra layer of art. But reading Chickens, even for me, after COVID and after Trump's presidency, felt very different. And I think it was really challenging, you know, to reread it again yesterday and today to kind of prepare for this. It just made me think a lot of the ways that thinking got polarized in the years of COVID and the years of Trump, of sort of, I don't really see it as equivalent, like being asked to wear masks in public versus the chance that you might lose your food sovereignty. But I think it helped me kind of see like that gray area had been erased, that, you know, you could think that maybe society should take some action, or that government should take some action to protect society, and also worry that the government would use a public health emergency to overstep and to take away some freedoms that we all might miss later on. But I think the events that have happened since I wrote the story have troubled the story quite a bit, and I'm very interested to hear the ideas and challenges you all had when you were reading it.
Can I ask you a very basic question about the literature that you do? How do you define environmental writing? What exactly is that? If we have a basic definition so we can understand what you're doing.
I mean, I think that's really broad. Environmental writing, for me, what I'm most interested in is natural resource management, and especially local level natural resource management, how we, you know, how we manage agricultural water, how we manage water treatment plants, how we decide how extraction industries really affect communities. Oil and gas, even agriculture can be an extraction industry that really has negative environmental effects in communities. So for me, that's the piece I'm very interested now in terms of how that affects human relationships and how that affects biodiversity. But I don't know if I have I feel like it would be hard to come up with a definition for environmental literature that's
no, just for you, because you're a literary writer, obviously. And I'm just wondering how you reconcile the two. How are you a literary writer and something of an environmental activist, it sounds like.
I mean, I think literature should be interrogating things that matter to the culture in which it's set. And these are things that matter to me. So it doesn't feel so much like a tension, except in the actual execution and the writing, because I think since I'm writing fiction, which actually would be true in nonfiction, but I'm not making a political stump speech, and fiction that would try to do that would be like, it would just be very didactic, and I don't think it would be very compelling. So I feel like for me, the struggle is to keep it sort of on an emotional level, which is what I think literature helps to do. It helps to humanize political issues and environmental issues without it coming off as too preachy or too heavy-handed, I guess.
Yes, well, you certainly have human relationships in your stories. You had mentioned Grace, and this might go to some of the global issues too. Grace seems to be kind of in the middle. You have Smith, who's the government guy, and you have Jerry, who seems to be the natural person, and she's trying to decide what to do with them. I don't know if she does. Does she? You don't know either.
I mean, chickens ended up being the last story, and it's the finale of Site Fidelity of the last of the 10. So the ending of chickens is actually the ending of the entire collection. And I think I just saw Grace as how I feel like most people exist in these issues is not really sure that they are on one side or the other, but having certain aspects of their lives that are important to them, that it feels like these outside forces may be threatening. So Grace, I think, is a little ambiguous because I feel like that's how it, to me, that's how it feels to be alive right now, that there's so many things to balance that it's, I don't know. Sometimes I think Grace doesn't know where to stand. She just wants to raise chickens. She just wants to like raise
Right.
chickens and grow food, and it has nothing to do with her, but it affects her. You know, she's not causing these problems, but the problems are hers. And so I think that's her struggle. And I like that about Grace because I think that's a relatable struggle.
It is. Diane? Did you have some questions about the rights? You're on mute.
I live across from a school and it's recess. So if you hear laughing children, that's why. That's why I was on mute also. Well, I think this is a fascinating topic. It's one I'm always asking, in part because of, I think I told you that we have a pond, a fresh spring pond in Michigan. And it's really, the Great Lakes near it are all polluted because of industrial waste. And we're in the thumb, and we have a little fresh spring pond, which is the cleanest water you can imagine. And the local city heard about it, and they wanted to take our water. And I said, well, no, it's just our spring. We're not selling it. We're not doing anything. And you have a water treatment facility. I don't understand why you want to. So we're kind of in this debate, but it's happening at the same time that the state of Michigan is selling water rights to Nestle's. So I feel like, wait a second, I'm sort of like low man on the totem pole, and you're wanting to have this conversation with me. We'll stop selling your water to Nestle. So I think that's one of the debates about, or the discussions about food scarcity. And I saw it in this policy. I didn't see it the same way as you did, Sharyn. I didn't see Grace in the center. I felt that she was a strong advocate for her rights, that she wanted to raise her chickens. And she seemed to be more strong about that than her, I forgot her boyfriend,
Jerry.
Gary.
Well, I guess I was looking, and Claire, help us out. I was looking at the end of the story where she's trying, the very end, where she's trying to decide. She knows that Jerry is going off somewhere to the hospital or whatever, but she's trying to decide to actually kill Smith. And that's where I'm seeing her as being somewhat ambivalent. Can she really do this? You know, and is she really, and I'm asking you, you know, there's a human level here that she's cutting through that has really nothing to do with the chickens, the regulations, or anything else. This is a person she sees in front of her who she might kill. And the question there is, you know, I'm asking you, then how do you make a decision based on your principles or your desire for rights? It seems to be a very basic question throughout the book. You know, and it's interesting that this is the last story because that's where it really comes to the fore.
I mean, I think that's a question I grapple with all the time. How far are we going to be asked to go to be able to live in this world and feel safe? And I think that's the question Grace asks at the end. And I think I think it felt important to stop before Grace made the decision, because I don't think that, I think to different degrees, I think we all may be facing, I mean, not whether we kill someone we have loved in our past, but just what is the planet worth to us? What are our communities worth to us? What are the freedoms and the ways we want to live worth to us? And nobody wants to be in that extreme of a position to have to make that kind of decision, like to take some kind of extreme action that would be against the way we would want to act or the way we would want to live. But I think I'm worried, or not worried. I think it seems like something to think about. What is worth fighting for? What would be worth? Like at what point do we have to actually take extreme action to make changes in our communities, but also globally? I mean, the news today that we're going to hit 1.5 degree warming in 5 years. I mean, that's like, part of me wonders what I should be doing that I'm not doing, that, you know, that feels dire. And that feels like people are, I mean, that's not even, people are going to die because we let that happen.
Yes.
And yet I'm just like writing stories, not that that's nothing, but like, is it enough? You know, so I guess to me, that's why I think we all have to decide what our limits are, and that those decisions will get more and more, the stakes for those decisions will continue to rise unless we act collectively to reverse the course that we're on. And I guess that's part of what Site Fidelity for me was investigating. It's not really a question I feel like I answered or can be answered. It's just something that I feel was important to think about, and still feel like is important to think about.
No, that's important. As an artist, you're presenting the issue and leaving and giving enough information for the rest of us to think about it, which is good. I think Anne has a question. You're muted.
Sorry. So I work in the environmental field as well, but I just want to say writing stories is enough. I tell people all the time who feel guilty or burdened with, you know, taking responsibility for a cumulative consequences, right? But I wanted to ask, so who do you think bears the cost of environmental consequences, or who has the responsibility, or is it landing in the right place? So that's my question.
What do you think? What do you think, Anne?
Well, I think that the who bears the cost is usually not the people who created the situation, kind of like in your story. But I think it's really complicated, and that I'm trying to wrap my head around that.
I mean, I think disenfranchised communities bear the cost way more than other communities do. I think that's true sort of worldwide. And that's something that I saw, it's something that I felt during the recession in Weld County when we were farming. It was the oil and gas boom, and there was fracking everywhere. And it felt really that the economic depression and like the lack of economic power in our community was what allowed that to happen. That we didn't have the political ability to fight it. And there really, because people were desperate, people were losing their homes. It was, you know, the recession it hit our rural community very hard. There wasn't even, it just felt like we had to accept it. because that's what the jobs were. And so I think that's a small example, but I think you can find examples. I mean, environmental racism is a big problem, and there's all sorts of things. You can find examples of it everywhere. So I do think that, but I also think that in a way, not all communities that are affected are not complicit, but I did feel that my community was to a degree complicit in not fighting enough to stop that kind of development, the fracking in particular.
You bring up in your book overall, and I'm not just talking about chickens, you bring up overall this question of the influence of business and those questions. You know, people need jobs. you know, if you're in a poor area and no one has jobs, and in some cases they don't, in your stories, and this big energy company comes along, no matter what it's doing, fracking or whatever, comes along, what do? I mean, can you really blame the people for wanting to work if those are the only jobs? Or in other words, I'm asking you set up this question. How do you make a decision? You need a job. You said the average person who you're writing about here needs to work. Some of them are very poor. So what do?
I mean, I think they take the job.
Yeah.
And then they work so hard that they don't have time to think about the systemic changes that would have to happen for them to not have to take a job that they know is damaging to their community. And I think that's, for me, you know, that's an evil that capitalism, in the way that we have allowed it to develop in this country, has. That's the interaction, I think, between capitalism and environmental degradation very frequently, that people who might otherwise fight against that kind of exploitation of resources have no power to do so.
But in some way, I agree with you. In other ways, I don't, because, you know, to take all accountability away from an individual, an individual's choice, I think is disempowering. And I'll give an example. I worked in Haiti in the 1980s, and there was a whole deforestation, and the country was eroding, but people still cut down the trees because they wanted to make fire, so they could cook. And there were alternatives. There were plenty of alternatives that were offered, environmentally sound alternatives, but people just didn't want to be bothered, and they continued to do that. And at some point, I think that they are accountable, that we need to say, and we need to hold our own selves accountable and say, wait a second, I don't need to eat this much meat, or I don't need to do these things to, and some of us are more compromised, and so it's harder. But I think we should always hold ourselves. Otherwise, I think we become just sloppy and when confused, and everything happens, and we just don't do anything. We become immobilized that way.
Well, you do have some characters, getting back to the stories, you do have some characters who get out of it, but it's hard. I'm sorry if I don't remember the characters' names, but there's one who becomes a nun. I mean, that's a way she gets out of the situation. There's another one who saves her money despite all kinds of odds to become a nurse. And they find other ways to get out of their situations. It's not ideal for them because you also have very dysfunctional relationships going on in the background because of that. But they are able to be strong enough to find a way out. And I don't know, I mean, did you intend that in the stories?
I mean, I also believe that individuals have power in certain settings. I do believe that. But I think one of the things that the stories in the book were exploring is how much how much power does one person have? How much, you know, I personally do believe that the way the choices, whether it, you know, whether it matters, whether I recycle an aluminum can, whether that makes any kind of difference, like that is an important ethic. Because I think the more people who live by that kind of ethic, the more we demand it of the systems we live in too. So I do believe that, but I don't know. I still think I'm not sure. And that was what a lot of the stories were about. Like how much, like, does it matter? And I don't know. This is why the story ends where it does. Does it matter if Grace kills Smith? And does it matter if Grace doesn't? What changes for Grace in that scenario? Like what power does Grace have to change the situation that she's found herself in? I don't really know. I honestly don't really know. And so that's what really, I think almost all the stories are sort of looking at that tension between what we can control in the lives that we have for our own life and for our broader communities, and what we've lost in terms of that power.
Well, you, in the story, you present the alternatives for her. Either she goes to jail about the chickens or she goes to jail for murder. So she has a personal stake in this, you know, which is worse. I mean, so, you know, you present that as something that's going through her head, like, okay, I'm going to go to jail anyway. So which one do I choose? And then she's looking at this human being who's alive, who seems to like her. How, you know, so he's human. And she's thinking about killing him because of this principle. And that's really disconcerting.
And I think also because of the choices he made about how to operate within the changes in the world around them, you know, like he kept his job, he locked the well, he, you know, it's complicated. I think it is complicated.
It is complicated because when we were talking just now about the alternatives people have in that community, his alternative to get a decent job was to work for the government. And the government is working against the people who he cares about. Very complicated. Does anyone else have something to say? No?
Sharyn, how did you choose this story and how did you choose to put it first?
Okay, answering the second part is easy. The stories are in alphabetical order, and she happens to be the first. And how did I choose the story? Because it's a very good story, because as you're hearing from Claire, it brings up a lot of issues in a very meaningful and artistic way. I mean, she is a literary writer, despite all of these other issues that are coming up. She's a literary writer who's presenting this in a way that I think most of us can understand the human value that's involved in it. So that's how I chose it. I think it really works in the book because the book is, as Diane said, brings up a lot of contemporary issues. But I also was looking for good writing, and that's Claire. And she hikes in Colorado, from what I understand, where I used to.
Diane, you mentioned we can pick up a book in the club. Sharyn, where we get the book?
The book, what's next? You can get it on Amazon. You can get it. I can send a link out to people. Actually, if you go to Green Writers Press, that's the publisher. It's Green Writers Press, and I think there's a link on the announcement.
There's a link on the calendar. It's not very big, but it's right under Sharyn's name, and there's a link so you can buy the book right there.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And I also recommend Claire's book.
Okay.
If you're interested in environmental writing, especially.
So what I got out of the end of that story, I think is a little different because I really saw that all of a sudden everything got out of control. And I feel that that's what happens frequently with government policies, and when we're facing these sort of dilemmas, and we all have different opinions, we're not even sure of what they are, and then we have human relations. And I think that everything just sort of got out of control. People, I think that's also why we frequently don't act, because we have human relations and we just don't want to say anything, so we don't. And so action, and if we do, does it matter anyway? Does it just hurt the relationship, or does it move things forward? I think that's a huge dilemma that all of us have in our society right now. We avoid talking politics because everybody has an opinion and they seem stuck in it. So we just talk to the ones who sort of agree with us. And I think it's a sad movement. And I know that it's been true for me in the environmental movement for a number of years. I talk, I move people to action, and then I shut up. It's just moving back and forth on that scale.
Is that what you found, Claire?
Yeah, I feel like the spiraling into like increasing levels of catastrophe was an intentional thing. I think especially, I don't think this is a big piece of the story, but I think the presence of guns in the story, that was an intentional choice because guns are so present in rural community. You can't even just say rural communities anymore. But in the story, without everybody having a gun, things would have been very different. And so, but I think the sense of like you're in an emergency situation, that was an intentional choice for that story, because it complicates things for Grace quite a bit. And it's hard to know how to react when you don't have time. There's no time to like have a measured response. It's just all escalated.
Right, she has her fingerprints on everything. So there's no choice for her. Any other questions or comments from people?
Meredith has one.
Oh, yes.
I was going to say that I was surprised that it escalated so quickly. And yes, the presence of guns really kicked that off. I was looking at the line where it said, I was not afraid to act in my own best interest, but I could no longer discern the correct action. My instincts had lost clarity, cut to static. I imagined murderer's prison, chicken keeper's prison. I saw my fields parched, my coop empty, my nation as confused and chaotic as my own silly girl heart, aching for freedom that seeps ever away, watching liberty puddle outside itself like tears, like blood. Wow, that is, she wasn't afraid, but she had just, she didn't know where to go, which way to turn, what to do.
Yeah, it seemed on that level, definitely. And it was also complicated by her relationships with those two men.
Yes, my own silly girl heart. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it seemed like, Smith was so hot and handsome, and he looked great in his suit and whatnot. And Jerry, I'm not sure what the relationship there seems sort of loose. But she likes him in a way. But yeah, silly girl heart.
It didn't like set out to write a love triangle, but it just sort of happened that way. But I did have some fun. Like I thought it was kind of fun to build those two characters and to have Grace relate to them in different ways. As a writer, that was a really fun, those were fun characters to imagine.
Yes, I love that. And I thought it was funny how I even you managed to capture some personalities of Hitchcock and Montana.
A lot of years with chickens, lots of years with chickens.
That is a question. That's a good point, because the chickens are characters in this, and their characters are reflected in the humans to some degree as it goes on. I wanted to ask you about a character we haven't talked about, and that's Fran. She is not a major character in the story, but she certainly plays a role in it. Can you say something about her?
I think Grace sort of needed someone to trust. In the story, there's no one else in the story that Grace can trust. Grace's parents are dead. Grace is, you know, sort of out on her own. And that felt, I guess that just felt, she felt too isolated without Fran. And also to have Fran be someone with a little more experience and a little more backbone and a little bit more able to recognize in the moment, like, this is a big deal, what's happening, to guide her through, like, to stand with her when they're stealing the water, to warn her when they're coming for the chickens. I just think Grace needed an ally, and Fran, that's where Fran came from. Grace needed Fran. What would Grace's life be like? What would her life have been like without Fran, really?
She'd be with Jerry.
Would she though? I don't know.
I don't know. I don't see that myself.
Fran was all sweet and white-haired on the outside with her piano lessons and her knitting needles. And then later it said her kitchen smelled mostly like applesauce. Well, those things seem like comforting things that you'd want to go toward when you're in really having some trouble. And yes, she had experience. Boy, she was tough. She knew exactly what to do. You start the fire, you know, wow.
It's as though she represented a strong community, more than just that one strong friend. And I wonder about the impact of community and the fundamental role that community has in small town. You know, when I grew up in a small town, we had, you know, many people involved in our lives. Some we didn't even know that well, but they were still part of our community. And as our communities become more and more isolated and individuals become more fearful of each other and we don't know each other, I think that dramatically changes things and allows policies that we may not even agree with to become permanent policies.
Yeah.
Yeah, Fran seems to be very aware of that. Meredith?
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I should be on mute.
No, go ahead. I also wanted to say, just in terms of the way you set the scene when she goes there, as I remember it, there's also this, besides applesauce, the smell of blood and seeing blood there. I mean, that's a little bit ominous in that scene. And it seems to lead to where Fran seems to be leading her. She's saying, okay, you have to make up your mind, but it sounds like she's guiding her as to what her mind should be made up to be. And that's what you can talk about that.
I guess I don't know that it was actually that intentional, but I do feel like Grace, I wanted Grace to sort of have to grapple with a lot of competing ideas or options, or and I do think that sometimes the people we trust can lead us in the wrong direction. And I think Fran is absolutely, I think, in my mind, Fran is telling Grace, like, kill the guy and we'll burn his body. And, you know, like, that's what Fran wants Grace to do. But I don't know if that's right. As much as I love Fran, and I think Fran has Grace's best interests at heart more than anyone else in the story, I don't know that that's the right decision for Grace. But I think we all sometimes have to deal with how much can we trust the people that we trust and love? And like, how do we keep our own mind and our own actions separate from just, I am part of this group, or I am, this person matters to me. And so I think sort of that's why Fran pushes Grace in that direction, because it forces Grace to grapple with that.
Yeah, Fran said, you do what you want, she said, but listen, I'm gonna burn my slash pile tonight. You got anything needs burning, I can throw it on. But then Grace is you know, with Smith on the floor, and there's that wooden handled kitchen cleaver right there. She said, I wanted to feed him. I wanted to bite him. I wanted to smash my boot in his nose. Yeah, she's got a lot of conflicting thoughts.
Meanwhile, he's bleeding on the floor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yipes.
I mean, I think the extremity of the story was also something, well, I think there are serious reasons for it to go in that direction. That was also something fun. To me, these were fun characters to write. And the situations that they found themselves in were both serious and a little bit ridiculous. And I don't know, this story is close to my heart because these characters were really fun to write, even though they have to make really serious decisions and they're in really serious situations.
I think in the beginning when you were talking about not making this sound didactic, I think that's what comes through, your affection for these characters and their humanity, that each one had to make some sort of decision. You know, Smith needed a job, and this was a good job for him. And Jerry likes hanging out in a farm, and this is what he's doing. And Grace needs to take care of her area, her territory. So they all come through as human characters, not as, even though they do seem on another level to represent, you know, the government and natural environment and all that, they still come through as human beings making everyday choices that they have to do, which makes the ending, for me anyway, more powerful. Because what would an average person do? I mean, what would this young woman do in that case? Ava? You're muted.
I have a question and some comments. So Claire, are you working still on that farm?
No, our farm failed, actually. We had to sell it before the bank came and took it away.
Oh, I didn't read the book, so my comment and the question can be very naive or irrelevant or wrong. Okay, so it sounds like this Grace is like a martyr, is like in 14th or 15th century, a young woman become a saint and then choose to victimize herself and to make a statement, a strong statement. I don't know whether this is a very extreme analogy or not, but sounds to me, she chooses to do it. Like Sharyn said, either way, you have to go to prison. And why not I just do something that is rather be put into prison and I shoot somebody first. okay, about the controversies, the farm has the situation because of policy, the environment, and this farmers and this farm had occurred into, make me think that I'm not a Buddhist. I know Dr. Charles Johnson is, but from Buddhist point of view, when you sit down, you lay back, you step back a few steps, you think about it, and then the individualism, the individual voice versus the trend, the policy, the government, it's quite confrontational and contradicting and conflicting. As an individual, I agree with Diane that you should not to say anything, because more and more individuals will become more disempowering. But in a way, I think, well, to step back, maybe it's not a solution, but at least a compromise, and to let the situation sit for a while in order to avoid the chaotic, the violence like that. That's one comment I thought about it. Another is, do you think, as I know you're a literary writer, not policymaker, but in our writers group, we have this gentleman, Richard Hawthorne, and he is American, white American, and he's based in Singapore. He writes certain articles about the environment, about solar energy, about the EV cars, and submit to the articles in Singapore and Southeast Asia. And one time he write about this article, how vegetarian, vegans, the dishes on the menu in the restaurant has some impact on your social impact as a whole in terms of your choice. Okay, if I go for more vegan and veggie, and to eat less beef, chicken, fish, would that eventually, it's a long way, I know, generation long, but maybe that is a way towards a better improvement of better environment, and start to change yourself, your diet habit, your thinking habit, your individualism. Try to change yourself, then see what kind of impact as a whole collectively into the entire society. That's my comment. But I don't know how to integrate that or reflect that all in one fiction story. Maybe someday I should write something about that.
Yes.
Just with your first comment that Grace seems a little bit like a martyr, that was definitely not an intention, but I was raised Catholic, and the mythology of martyrs is like very deeply ingrained. Even though I'm not practicing anymore, I think I carry that with me. And as far as vegetarian and veganism, I think that's a really powerful individual statement to make. And I do think that has a huge impact. Our agricultural system is incredibly damaging. I mean, it's really one of the worst things, especially meat production. It takes more water. It's inhumane at the level of the animal, but also at the level of humans in the process. I mean, children are working in the slaughterhouses, and it's largely immigrant labor. And I think during the pandemic in particular, when the food shortages happened, and basically the corporations went to the government and said, we need to stay open, and the meatpacking workers got sick and some of them died. I mean, it is an inhumane system. And I think small farms, local farms, regional systems can heal that. And I think small farms often rely on animals to provide fertilizer and nutrition. It's sort of like this sort of elegant system that nature made, where the animals run the pasture and you can eat the meat, but then they also provide the fertilizers. You don't need the chemicals when you grow the crops. So I think it really depends on what type of meat that you're eating, how it was raised, how well you know the farmer that grew it. It doesn't take away the environmental impact completely, but it does, I think, lower what I think of as the ethical cost and the environmental cost of that food. With that, but I do think veganism and vegetarianism are also really powerful choices that individuals can make for as an environmental straight, you know, just as an environmental statement.
In the long run, I truly believe that. So what do you do other than writing? So you moved out of the farm field, and what do you do now other than writing?
When we first moved off the farm, I went back to public school teaching. I'm a trained public school teacher. So I did that full time for a few years. While I was doing that, I also went back and got my MFA in creative writing because I knew I had things to learn. I knew I wanted to become a better writer. So I got the degree. And in 2009, that was when I left full-time teaching to become a full-time writer. The literary writing, the short story collection will not, you know, it's not enough money to like not have a teaching job. But I was able to also be able to do some screenwriting and a little bit of magazine writing, and have just been able to cobble it together in the last few years, for which I am very grateful.
Anne?
Go ahead, Anne.
Oh, so what I was gonna say was, I'm your Smith, kind of. I'm gonna have to read the story so I can see where I land. But I work for the government, and I'm a regulator, but I'm always questioning myself. And this is why I'm interested in the policy, the Public and Global Affairs Committee, because I think lately I've been thinking, we as human beings, we try to have control over the environment, the thing that which has control over us. I find it really ironic that policymakers and regulators are so arrogant that they make these widespread policy decisions without really, sometimes it's just out of ease, but without really thinking about the implications that they have. But I didn't know if anybody has any comment on that.
Well,
I
Claire,
do.
I think your story, oh, Diane.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Skeeter. Go ahead, Sharyn.
No, you're the policy person.
Well, no, I do. First of all, I don't think, as an environmentalist, policy person, and I don't think you're the same as Smith. You got to read the book for that. I don't think you'll be the same. But I do think that, now I've forgotten the question. I'm sorry. I'll be quiet. Go ahead, Sharyn.
I'm going to ask Claire to answer the question. Because I agree with you that I doubt that Anne is very much like she can't be like Smith. She can't.
I mean, I think the story, it is, as I said, it was really rooted in this feeling that our farm was going to be regulated maybe out of existence in the name of food safety. That felt very real to me at that time. And at the same time, I think regulation is absolutely essential as a check on capitalism. Basically, I don't think we can live without it. And so I think it's as complicated as anything else. I don't know that I can answer that, but I do think from that perspective, it felt as though, again, as a small farmer without a lot of economic power, I had way less influence in the regulation setting process. I didn't have the same kind of access to government people who were making those decisions, as did large scale poultry operations and large scale organic vegetable producers in California. Like that, those were the, you know, the regulations were being put in place to save people from, like, it's like Michael Pollan says, like, all our salad is being washed in one big sink. And so if that sink gets polluted and then it goes all across the nation, that's a really big problem. Whereas we had, you know, 150 customers who we knew by name, and we washed our own produce and handed. So it just, I don't know how you make regulation that can be flexible, but the regulation that was being made did not feel flexible. And it felt like maybe it was going to be very difficult as a small farm to comply.
But in your story, you have the other layer of bird flu, which is a different, it adds to the situation, because there you have a real potential danger that the government is trying to somehow mitigate. So it's a problem. You know, you don't want, as a consumer, I wouldn't want a chicken with bird flu. So,
No, as a farmer, I don't want it either.
Okay. So,
yeah,
you know, that's the added layer as to why the government is, in this case anyway, in the story, stepping in.
Well, those questions of, you know, what are the boundaries of when the government makes the decisions and when when we have individual rights, I think those are fundamental right now, fundamental questions. And not only that, but, you know, does the government, if the government takes action, what is the responsibility and who has a voice in making these decisions? I mean, your point, Claire, of you feeling like you didn't have access, you didn't have the power to have the same voice as the larger corporations. That is fundamental, I think, for a powerful democratic government that's run by people, supposedly. You know, those are issues that, you know, historically it was technologically impossible to solve, but now it's not. I mean, so maybe we should be changing some public process and public policy to allow more citizen, not allow to gain more citizen voice and more citizen choice and more knowledge of what's going on. If we're all looking at, you know, that sense of I'm just so damn mad about, what are we mad? Everybody's so mad. What are they mad about? I think that's fundamentally one of the issues, is that there's such a disparity between corporations having voice and access, or the rich and powerful having voice and access, and the rest of us not so much.
I am very
I think, I'm sorry.
I am so angry about that. I feel mad about that all the time, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that your whole book has, all the stories have some element of that in them. I want to say about chickens, though, you do give, there is something that the government has set up but is not doing for these people. And that is, I think there's some part where the character is saying, look, they don't even test. They have tests set up, but they're not even testing. They're just coming in and saying, get rid of your chickens, without knowing anything about them. So there was something in the regulations that might have helped Grace, because she's saying my chickens are okay, but they're not even testing them. So this is a problem. Like, the government kind of, it sounds like it took that into consideration, but then they're not following through with it.
I think really one of the questions is really how much, I mean, and this is a question for the individual, but it's also a question for society. And it's something I feel like has shifted over the course of my life, is just the balance between privacy and freedom and security, and that tension that kind of exists, and how much of privacy and freedom are we willing to sacrifice to feel safe. And is that even a trade-off that we should have to make? But I do think like a lot of these, I think a lot of Grace's, the forces that are pushing on Grace have to do with that. How do we feel safe in the world? And what are our different ideas about how we can feel safe in the world? And what does that mean for people who disagree with us?
It's 12:07. So I think we're supposed to end our conversation. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation. Does anybody have anything else you want to say?
It is a great program. I like it. It's
Great.
Thank you, Diane, for making it happen, and Sharyn for editing the book.
Thank you.
Sharyn's our leader.
And
Well, thank
Claire
you.
is our leader right now.
Thank you all for having me and for this really wonderful discussion. I think it's good to challenge all the ideas that are, I think they're important things to talk about, and they're not easy. But thank you so much for having me.
being here, Claire.
Oh,
And
thank you.
There for your short
Very
story. That's great.
Really fun. Keep on writing.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'm sure. And just want to say that the next event will be Joseph Bruchak, who is a Native American writer, and that will be on May 31st. So if you like this one, you can come for the next one. And that includes you, Claire.
Oh, thank you. I might actually.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you all.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Sharyn, Diane, everybody.